What's the most powerful you have no control here moment you've ever witnessed? I grew up with a mother who suffered from dissociative disorder and narcissism. As far back as I can recall, she was hooked on opiates and would go to any lengths to get them, and I do mean anything. In my childhood, it wasn't uncommon for her to have an outburst while high and lash out at me, tearing me down by targeting every insecurity and fear she knew I had. She deliberately sabotaged my relationships with my dad and siblings. There were periods where she would stay awake for days on end, then collapse mid-activity, her eyes glazed over, slumped over like a puppet without strings. When she'd snap back into action, she'd destroy everything in her path. Sometimes, I'd leave a clean home only to return to what looked like a chaotic storm had ripped through: shattered glass, animal waste, filthy clothes, cockroaches, empty pill bottles, crushed pill dust, and random debris scattered everywhere. On the worst nights, she'd start hallucinating, and it wasn't unusual to find her bleeding from running through broken glass. I remember staying awake for days because she and my dad would scream at each other nonstop, trying to force me to choose sides. They would even burst into my room at 4 a.m. to drag me into their arguments. She would manipulate me, abandoning me in random places while she met up with different sugar daddies. This happened while she was still with my dad, and she never apologized, not once. On the rare occasions when her mind cleared, she would point fingers at everyone else but herself, as if she was incapable of doing wrong. Money was always tight since she was in no condition to work. While she sold some of her pills, most of that cash went back into her addiction. Because of that, we often found ourselves homeless, without electricity or water for long stretches, and we rarely had any food. I regularly went to bed having eaten only a school lunch that day. On weekends, sometimes I didn't eat at all. My extended family had no idea what was happening. The summer I turned 16, my aunt, who I hadn't spoken to much since I was younger, reached out. She asked if I'd like to visit her in Texas for a few weeks. Of course, I jumped at the chance and was thrilled. I didn't bother telling my parents because, honestly, I doubted they'd even realize I was gone. So, they had no clue. My aunt drove all the way to Iowa and spent the afternoon with us. When my aunt arrived at our house, my parents barely even registered her presence. It was like they didn't have the awareness to realize someone had shown up unexpectedly. They stayed holed up in their room the entire time. The house was relatively clean when we left to grab food, but by the time we returned, the chaos had already descended. It looked as though a whirlwind had torn through in our absence. On our drive to Texas, my aunt confessed that what unsettled her most wasn't just the mess, but how I acted around it. She said she expected me to react, but instead, I silently navigated around the wreckage, gathering my things like it was just another day. This worried her deeply, and she finally asked if I was truly safe at home. I told her yes, because it was all I had ever known. She admitted that what she had seen terrified her and suggested I move in with her in Texas. I thought she was joking at first and brushed off the idea. But after a few days with her, I realized I needed to make the change. My aunt and her family showed me kindness, love, and understanding, things I never knew existed. It shook me to the core, and I knew I had to leave my old life behind. So we made the decision that I would get legally emancipated from my parents and move in with my aunt. The process led to a day in court where I sat across from my parents and their lawyer. The judge asked me why I wanted to leave, and I shared my story. I told him about the love and care I had finally experienced and my desire to live a life of peace. Their lawyer responded, "It seems like you have no respect for your parents. Is it because of their financial situation? It looks like you're attracted to the benefits of a more comfortable life, not because your parents are unfit." My parents immediately jumped in, shouting and trying to tear me down just like they always had. I stayed quiet, letting them say their piece, holding back all the anger and hurt I had built up over the years. They tried to provoke me, to break me as they'd done so many times, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Finally, when the judge turned to me to speak, I kept my voice steady and looked directly at my parents and their lawyer. If you're asking whether I have no respect for my parents, then you're right. But to say it's just about money is wrong. I don't respect them because they failed me. As I was finishing, my mother started to lose control, just as she always had, shouting across the table, "He's lying." That little, before the judge slammed his gavel, silencing the room. My mother, now stunned and furious, looked at the judge in disbelief. I faced her, holding back tears, and said, "For once in your life, act like an adult. You can't stop me by screaming anymore. You don't control me anymore. You have no power over me now." As I finished speaking, the judge motioned to an officer, who approached my mother and ordered her out of the room. Her expression was frozen in shock as she was escorted out. The judge then turned to me, my aunt, my father, and his lawyer. He spoke calmly, "I'm sorry you've had to endure this for so long. You deserve to live like any normal child, in a stable environment. It's clear to me your parents can't provide that. You'll return to Texas with your aunt, and social workers will check on you regularly. Make the most of this second chance, young man. Good luck." The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, but all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. My father and his lawyer were also escorted out, and the tears I'd been holding in finally burst forth like a flood. It's been 7 years since that day, and I'm proud to say I've grown into a well-adjusted adult. I have a great job, supportive friends, and an incredible girlfriend. Therapy has been a huge part of my journey since moving to Texas, and I no longer struggle with the sleepless nights, anxiety, or depression that used to consume me. Life is good now.